Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So I have a few updates in the fight for women's sports, and I also wanted to talk about something that's really important that I think we need to be aware of that's going on at the moment when it comes to these sporting bodies and their trans policies. So it appears that all of these sporting bodies, whether they're national, like in the USA, in the UK or wherever, or international, they're all beginning to reveal their trans policies, or, you know, to confirm what their trans policies are. And over a few years, some of them have begun to tighten their trans policies. So we've gone from, with many of them simply saying that a man can just say that he's a woman and he's allowed to compete with females. He's allowed to compete in women's sports in female categories just by way of identity. Some sporting bodies still adhere to that, and we're seeing a lot of the repercussions of that. However, others, due to backlash, rather than simply saying, okay, trans-identified males who are athletes do not belong in female categories, rather than just saying that, what a lot of them are doing now is just tightening their policies. And there's all this talk about testosterone. They're monitoring their testosterone. It has to be at a certain level prior to the competition or prior to competing in that category. They're monitoring it. They're submitting their testosterone levels, undergoing tests, whatever. They have to have been on hormones for a year or 2 years. That's what a lot of these sporting bodies are doing now. And I just want to bring to your attention the fact that this is not a compromise. In fact, this is something not to be compromised with. And I hope people are not falling for this and just deciding, okay, well, you know, it does reduce their advantage, which studies show it actually doesn't. Because men and women, believe it or not, are not just hormones. They're not just hormone levels. In no way does being on estrogen turn you into a woman. Just like being on testosterone does not turn a woman into a man. And the physical advantages that a man possesses, especially one that has gone through male puberty, grown into a full-grown man, no matter how much they manipulate their hormones and try and keep their testosterone at a certain level, they're still male and they don't belong in women's sports. It's as simple as that. So the most recent sporting body to compromise is USA Climbing. Now, anybody who's ever done rock climbing knows that it requires a lot of upper body strength, and it takes a while to build up that strength to be, you know, a successful climber. So I'm assuming this is indoor climbing predominantly, and this is something that a lot of young kids get involved in all the way up to adulthood, and there are different competitive levels. So USA Climbing, first they were okay with just somebody identifying as a woman competing in women's categories. And obviously that got a lot of backlash. They had one transgender athlete who was able to compete in the female categories. Because of that, parents were complaining, other athletes were complaining. So they decided to tighten their policy. And the policy they have today is the one that focuses on testosterone, of course. But what is happening is they are now asking you this month to weigh in on the situation, to give your take on their trans policy. How fair do you think it is? Is it appropriate? Is this the right direction for them to be going in? Because even their tightened trans policy has received backlash too. So want to bring this to your attention. It's really important that as many of us as possible take part in the survey that they've put out there, asking us what we think. So before we get into that, I do have a couple of updates. If you don't already know, April Hutchinson, Canadian powerlifter, received her response from her federation. So she got a 2-year suspension simply because she used certain terminology that her federation didn't like. On Piers Morgan Uncensored, she may have used the term trans-identified male or biological male, referring to somebody as he, and that's a no-no apparently. So that was classed as violating their harassment policy. And she was accused of misgendering and essentially bullying this poor trans athlete, biological male who's #1 powerlifter in Canada, you know, across all age ranges in the female category. I wonder why. And she got accused of bullying somebody who has gone on camera mocking female athletes for their, bench press, saying that their bench press is terrible. Well, guess what? Females do not have the upper body strength of a man. Naturally, they don't possess that upper body strength. That's why it's important that we compete in the correct categories, in the appropriate categories. That's why it doesn't make sense having women competing against men. So after the appeal, April had her 2-year suspension reduced by half. So now it is reduced to 1 year, and she should be back in November. It should never have happened in the first place. She did not deserve to be suspended for 2 years for simply stating fact. And it's not right that female athletes have their language policed. It's very important when you're fighting for fairness in women's sports that you're able to speak with clarity. We're talking about somebody who is male here and continues to be male. No amount of hormones is going to change that. So in her appeal, April argued, advocating for women's sex-based rights and protection is about fairness and equality, not harassment. If women cannot state biological reality without being accused of harassment, then women cannot protest against the sex-based discrimination occurring against us. We are effectively silenced. And that's exactly what happened. The hearing was reviewed by a single arbitrator who said the CPU's decision to discipline Hutchinson was reasonable based on its broad definition of harassment in its code of conduct and ethics. So that's what they constitute harassment, misgendering and things of that nature. Then, the arbitrator agrees that the decision was fair based on their definition. However, the decision was also said to be procedurally imperfect and that Hutchinson's suspension should be reduced from 2 years to 1. So, that's the decision. There's no further appeal process that's not available. So that's it. And from what I can see, April is making the best of the situation. She's taken some time out and plans on coming back stronger in November. So it's not a perfect decision, but at least it's a step further in the right direction. A year goes by, very quickly, as we know. I don't know where 2023 went. It went by in a flash. And at least it's going to be somewhat of a break, a time to just take for herself. So wishing April all the best, but she's continuing, of course, in the fight for women's sports. And one thing to also come out of this whole situation, it definitely brought awareness to what the Canadian Powerlifting Union were doing, to these trans policies and how relaxed they are. So the CPU had its own policy for transgender athletes. Initially, it was simply to just identify as a woman, essentially. That's why we had Avi Silverberg show up and demonstrate how ridiculous the policy was, how relaxed it was, that any man could come off the street and say they identified as a woman. And apparently they previously had this stance that trans athletes should be able to participate in the gender with which they identify, regardless of whether or not they have undergone hormone therapy. So that was their policy. They didn't want to hinder trans athletes at all in competing in the category that they wanted to compete in, so they left it open. But now they have tightened their policy and have gone down the whole monitoring testosterone. They've gone down that route. So at the end of 2023, the CPU introduced stricter requirements, such as requiring the trans athletes to declare their identity as female before competing and to possess a valid passport bearing the female gender. Now, I'm assuming in Canada, it's quite straightforward to change your sex on your passport if you want to identify as something different. And requiring trans athletes to show that their total testosterone level in serum has been equal or below 2.4 nanomoles per litre, and or free testosterone equal or below 0.433 nanomoles per litre, or at or below the upper limit of normal of a particular laboratory reference for at least 12 months prior to the first competition. So they have to show that their testosterone level is within that range 12 months prior to competing, and then requiring athletes' total testosterone level in serum to remain at or below 2.4 nanomoles per litre, and free testosterone to be at or below 0.433 nanomoles per litre throughout the period of desired eligibility to compete in the female category. So as long as they want to compete, they have to keep their testosterone levels at those levels. So they have definitely tightened up their trans policy, and a lot of people put that down to athletes such as April Hutchinson speaking out and drawing attention to how unfair these trans policies are, how unfair it is to have males competing in women's categories. And it was also the International Powerlifting Federation that put pressure on the CPU to tighten their policies too. So the CPU is basically going along with their international counterpart and, updating their policy to fall in line with that. So April said, "I am grateful to the IPF for implementing a stricter policy. I've had nothing but a great relationship with the president. He's been wonderful to work with. This accomplishment means more to me than any gold medal. And I have found my calling, which is advocacy for fair sport for women." So I hope April's story encourages more female athletes to speak out. Obviously, many have kept quiet because they don't want to be suspended for 2 years or whatever. I mean, that could really set back somebody's career so much that it would be hard to come back from. 2 years in the world of sports is a very long time. So I'm grateful that April's suspension was reduced to 1 year and she's making the best of it. But this does highlight the fact that a lot of these sporting bodies, they really believe that monitoring testosterone is a compromise. We have USA Cycling doing the same thing with their rules in regards to testosterone. USA Boxing recently announced their policy that, the athletes have to keep their testosterone within a certain level. But that one is even more strict because they do have to go through gender reassignment surgery. And I don't think that's something to ever be encouraged under any circumstances. But when you say that you can compete in women's sports, in women's categories, if you chop off your bits, that's incentivizing going through that surgery. We have a lot of trans influencers who have not done that sort of surgery, like Dylan Mulvaney. Dylan has certainly taken the time to think about it. I thought having that surgery was a matter of urgency to save lives. But someone like Dylan certainly knows the importance of taking your time and not rushing into that sort of surgery. So it certainly is not something to be incentivized. And these policies, they incentivize athletes going on hormones and even taking it a step further and having the surgery. So I don't think that's a good idea at all. But furthermore, just want to reiterate that this is not a compromise. Men do not belong in women's sports, period. End of story. And this is not something that is now going to make women's sports fair. A lot of studies have shown that male athletes don't lose the advantage over women just because they're on hormones. Those advantages can continue well over the 1 year or the 2 year qualification mark that a lot of these sporting bodies are adopting. For up to 8 years and beyond, according to just what's been studied so far, they still maintain their advantages when it comes to upper body strength, bone density, muscle mass. I sound like a broken record, but it's just fact. So when it comes to USA climbing, the new stricter policy has also been met with criticism from climbers who claim that it's discriminatory. For this reason, it has now been paused, and the USA Climbing are currently reviewing it. So USA Climbing are now pausing their trans policy, and they're asking you, the public, to give your opinion. So I guess before they solidify it, they want to hear from people. And this is our opportunity to really have our voices heard. So please go to the link that I'm going to put in the description and take part in the survey. You can just answer it, whether you agree or not, just go through the questions, or you can give further information. They do leave room for you to comment further. And you may want to point out facts like these. Men using HRT experienced minimal declines in physical performance over 12 months, substantially surpassing average female performance for up to 8 years. Males enjoy a 28 to 40% advantage in combat precision sports and have 162% more punching power than females. Their 60 to 100% advantage in arm strength is only reduced by 33% after 3 years of HRT. So you might want to include some information such as that I'll also link below. And yeah, please take the time to do this survey. We only have to the 14th of January, so not long. This is why I'm doing this video. I want everybody to stop what they're doing and take part in this survey. They're also thinking about an open category for athletes who can't fulfill these requirements for whatever reason, or maybe they refuse to fulfill those requirements. So they also, are thinking of an open category, but you need to let them know that the open category should be available regardless. It should be available for trans-identified males who want to compete in sports. Let them compete in the open category. They shouldn't be in the women's category at all. That's not even something that should even be an option, because we have categories in sports for a reason. And those reasons don't magically disappear because somebody is on hormones. And before I go, I just want to read something to you that I find sums up this whole situation. It's not just about whether or not a male athlete has physical advantages over women. It's not just about that. Males do not belong in women's sports, period. So next time somebody says, oh, well, this takes away the advantage, as they're claiming, in the young person who got a volleyball scholarship for women, but the person was male, a lot of people were saying this person didn't go through puberty, which is an absolute tragedy. For anybody to say that as if it's a good thing, a lot of people were saying this person didn't go through puberty and all of this, so there's no advantages, and that makes it okay. No, I didn't say anything about advantages. I don't care about all of that. He's a boy. He's a male. Males don't belong on female teams, period. Blocking puberty and reducing testosterone is a TRA compromise, trans right activist. And I'm not interested in compromising. I will not compromise. I can walk the middle ground on a lot of things, but this, absolutely not. A male taking estrogen or blocking his puberty so he can compete on a women's team is no different than doping as far as I'm concerned. If you're a boy, try out for a boys' team. If the medication you're taking makes it harder for you to compete with other boys, then oh well. Actions meet consequences. You can argue about advantages all day long, and I'm going to respond the same way every time. Keep males out of female spaces. Stop lying to children about puberty. Stop telling children they can change their sex. Stop playing games with their mental health. Perfectly well said there. And another thing, these trans policies are not addressing the locker room situation. No female athlete should have to have a male in their locker room. End of story. That is absolutely unacceptable. So thanks for watching. Let me know what you think. Take care of yourselves, and God willing, I will see you in the next video.